Okay, Nigel, you're live and ready to go.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Right, okay. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the February meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny meeting at North Norfolk District Council. Just before we get started, just to remind you of the protocols we are all, I think, familiar with regard to remote working and the need to be mindful of when we've got our mic on, and we should only have our mic on normally when we are speaking, and unless you are part of the meeting, to switch off your video. And there are a few other things that we need to remember along the way, not least of which, if we choose to leave our workstation, then we should turn our videos off. Okay, I won't go into more detail of that. Thank you very much. We'll turn to our first item on the agenda, which is to receive apologies for absence. I've got two that I'm aware of, Nigel Housden and Peter Fisher. Are there any others?
That's all I've been notified of, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Second item is substitutes. I'm not aware that either of those were able to arrange substitutes. Is that correct?
Yes, I think they were at fairly short notice. The apologies, so they haven't arranged substitutes, no.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to number 3, public questions and statements. I'm not aware of any.
None received.
Okay, thank you. Item 4, we'll go to the minutes of the previous meeting to approve the minutes. Just bear with me one. Okay, if we go through them by page, please, for any corrections or inaccuracies. Page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Does anybody have any observations, or are you all content to accept those as an accurate record of that meeting? Could I have a proposer, please? Councillor Spagnola and Councillor Varley, proposer and seconder. Show of hands then, please, to accept.
Okay, yeah.
Looks like unanimous.
Yep.
I've just realised the last meeting. Is that?
Oh yeah, apologies. Yeah, Emma was absent from the last meeting,
Yeah.
so it'd have to be another proposer if possible.
Okay, right. I've got Councillor Blaythwaite.
Yep.
Thank you. Do you want a fresh show of hands?
That's fine. I think everyone approved apart from Emma that wasn't there anyway, so that's not a problem.
That's fine. Thank you. Well spotted. Right, moving on then to items of, so I'll sign those minutes in due course. Moving on to item 5, items of urgent business. I'm not aware of any.
No, none received.
Thank you. Item 6, declarations of interest. Does anybody have any declarations of interest in respect to the business on our agenda today? I see no hands. Thank you very much. Item 7, petitions from members of the public. I'm not aware of any.
None received.
Thank you. 8, consideration of any matter referred to the committee by a member. Nobody has done that with me.
We have, so we had Councillor Andrew Brown's request at the last meeting to look into the food waste collections. So I've arranged for Steve Hems to attend to just speak to that item and give everyone kind of an update on where we are. I don't know if he's available now to come in.
Yes, that's fine. Yes, that's a carryover, isn't it, from the last meeting?
Yeah.
Yes, but just before we do, I mean, my understanding is that work has been done or was done in 2019 in respect of the latest waste contract. And so if we've got Mr. Hems here today, that would be really helpful just to talk us through whether that work which was done at that time would perhaps be capable of being carried over at some point and satisfying perhaps the point that Councillor Brown has raised. So over to you, Mr. Hems.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members. Hope you're all keeping warm out there on this very cold, snowy day. Yes, in terms of food waste, so when we procured the latest waste and resources, waste and services contract, which went live last year, we included a costed option for food waste. So that costed option basically sits there as something that we can introduce should we require to at any point within the contract life. There is obviously an additional cost to the authority to deliver that. It was felt by members at the time that the contract was let that that there was not sufficient cost benefit to introduce food waste at that time. So it wasn't included. However, we can, the way the contract was structured is such that we can introduce that element of food waste collection at any point within the contract term. Just so members are aware, the government has currently the Environment Bill 2020, which was introduced to Parliament, I think November of last year, going through the parliamentary process. That includes a number of provisions that government originally set out in their waste and resources and waste strategy, including the mandatory collection of food waste from all households. Now, the government originally set out in their timetable or in the consultation that they wanted to introduce that by 2023. At the current time, obviously in the circumstances we are, whether that will change, but in the current time, the government has indicated that they are intending to stick to that timetable. And so it is possible, probable, subject to it continuing successfully through its parliamentary journey to an act, that all local authorities in England will be required to introduce a food waste collection to all households. So we're currently watching that position. I can reassure members that the way in which we have the contract structured means that that can be switched on effectively at the beginning of any 1 year of the contract. So potentially if we needed to introduce that in 2023, we could do so. Now, it is normal for the government, when they introduce legislation, to include new burdens funding for it, so that effectively the council would not be disadvantaged by legislative requirements being placed on them. And I think obviously that is something we're currently looking at and waiting to see what will happen, but also to make sure that any service that we offer fits with the mandated requirement that government set out in the Environment Bill or in the Environment Act when it comes through into legislation. So yeah, I'm happy to take any questions about that, but that's a very brief update on the position.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Hems. Councillor Brown, you were the instigator of that. Would you like to respond?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Morning, everybody. And thank you, Steve, for that summary of the government's position. I'm pleased that the government and I seem to be on the same page with regard to rolling out household food collections across the country and, of course, in our district. Can I ask you if we have any preparations or any intention to discuss this aspect with our contractors at this stage, or are we going to wait until the Environment Bill is enacted? And also, I'd like to wish you well in the current weather conditions in managing the waste collection at this very difficult time. And I just want to put on record our thanks as a council to our employees who are operating in these very difficult circumstances in the current weather conditions. Thanks.
Mr. Hems.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we haven't. I mean, obviously, we are having continued conversations with the contractor on a number of issues around the introduction of various services. We've had a very brief discussion in light of the Environment Bill around the potential to switch that that element of the contract on should we choose. We have not discussed with them. We're a year into the contract at this stage, or almost a year. We have not discussed with them switching it on earlier than that at this stage. I think from an officer point of view, it would seem to be slightly challenging to go through, or to, going through the cost of introducing a service now, which would cost the authority potentially quite a lot of money in terms of, setting up delivery of food waste receptacles, to have it introduced a year later mandatorily with new burdens funding. My advice to members would be that the benefit of introducing it a year early, compared with the cost, I know that's quite a cynical position to take, but at the end of the day, we all have a duty to protect the public purse. The cost of service is not insignificant. The cost of implementing is not insignificant. The capital cost of vehicles is likely to be quite a lot of money. A number of years ago, probably 2017, Norfolk as a whole waste partnership did some work that was funded by it's an organisation called RAP. They're a government-funded organisation that look at reducing or improving recycling rates and reducing waste going to landfill. And that looked specifically at the cost of introduction across Norfolk and models that could be adopted in order to make it more attractive. So one of the things that they looked at as a sort of potential model was county basically passing the entire benefit of avoided disposal costs to the district. Now, at the moment, for recycling, we get a proportion of the avoided disposal costs in the form of recycling credits. So if we were to do food waste, we would get some recycling credit back from county as an avoided disposal cost. The method, or the position that they put forward at that time, the only way it became anywhere near affordable to a local authority, and the cost was in the region of about £27,000 per year to us as North Norfolk, was if the county gave the whole cost of avoided disposal back to the district, and if we moved the residual collections, so your grey black bins, to either a 3 or 4 weekly collection cycle. Doing it on because obviously one of the things by taking food waste out of the collection system is that effectively you reduce the weight of that bin, you reduce some of the capacity, or you provide extra capacity within the bin. So the only way that worked based on that scenario was moving to a 3 or 4 weekly collection of residual waste. And I think most authorities felt that was not an acceptable position at this current time. Obviously, if we move to food waste as a mandatory position, we will revisit the position in terms of whether that gives us options to look at a less frequent collection of residual waste, because clearly that would potentially come with a benefit. Although we recognise that some households do produce a lot of residual waste, and there are some stuff that still would go into residual, such as families with small children putting nappies in. I think collecting every 3 or 4 weeks would be slightly challenging in terms of what people would accept. Hopefully that answers your question, Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you very much, Steve. I note that in the areas where it has been introduced, in Norwich and parts of Broadland, I understand that food waste collection has been extremely popular, and people understand and get that they're contributing to the reduction of methane created by food getting into landfill sites, etc. So thank you for that. That's a very thorough explanation, and I'm happy, Mr. Chairman, with the response from Mr. Hems.
Thank you very much for that. I mean, the purpose of this item on the agenda today is effectively to just gain enough information to make a decision with regard to what we should do in respect of this proposal, rather than get into too deeper aspects of the case for and against and so forth. So it does seem to me that we've got an outline of what the situation is. It's really for you as a committee, for us as a committee, to decide whether we want to add it to our work programme in the future, and to perhaps ask Mr. Hems if he would be able to produce a short report which takes the situation that he's described and that which existed in 2019 and place it in the context of today or the current situation, and look at what is coming perhaps down the track in respect to how that might be implemented in the future. Would that be an acceptable way forward? And we could then slot it into our work programme at a convenient point. I wouldn't want that work to be done perhaps too early if, for example, some of the work that, or some of the issues that Mr. Hems has outlined, if we're still not clear about that, then we may want to delay that consideration until we know with greater certainty what it's going to look like. But perhaps it might be along those lines that we proceed. Any thoughts on that? You're nodding your head, Councillor Brown. So that's an indicator, is it? Okay.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Yes. I think that seems a very practical and sensible suggestion. I did notice on the work programme that's set out on a subsequent agenda item this morning that we didn't have this issue within the work programme. So I think it would be sensible to have it. Obviously, we can't gainsay how the bill progresses through Parliament, but we're assuming that it will. And therefore, I think it would be sensible to have it on our work programme for the future.
That's the idea, basically, of this particular item on our agenda, to enable that to happen. You proposed it at the last meeting, and clearly that's right that we should consider it today. The matter of when we slot it in is something to be decided in the future, and I think we will probably look to Mr. Hems in that regard to see what the situation really looks like. There's little point in us doing a consideration until we've got greater certainty. Mr. Hems.
Chair, if I could perhaps suggest a way forward in that respect, that I have a look at the timetable in respect to the Environment Bill, and in liaison with your good self, maybe agree a date at which this would seem sensible to bring back based on the information that's contained within there. I think, we have to pick that point in time where we have a degree of certainty about what the bill is suggesting. Probably once it's been through its first reading, and then look at coming back with an update in that respect, if that's acceptable.
Yes, I think that is a very pragmatic and sensible way forward, unless anybody's got any other observations and thoughts that they'd like to make. Councillor Gerard, Councillor Mancini-Boyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Hems, I've looked into this a little bit, and the way really of affording this recycling food is maybe instead of having food collection fortnightly, moving it to 3 weekly, as our recycling strategies are improved. Because I've noticed in my bin, I don't need my bin collected every other week. So one way of looking forward to this maybe is, as people are recycling more, we can maybe move it, do waste collection to every 3 weeks. This may free up some money for the recycling. I don't know your views on that.
I don't want to get into a debate about it right now. I think you've raised a valid point, and I'm sure Mr. Hems will be capable of incorporating that in the options that he'll present to us in the future. So I'm just conscious that we don't want to prejudge the matter. What we're really about is making a decision with regard to putting it on our forward work programme and giving Mr. Hems an adequate brief on what we're looking to or would want to consider at some stage in the future. Councillor Heinrich, you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I was just going to say, certainly in town areas, I would be very reluctant to see any move away from the fortnightly black bin collection, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. So does anybody have any other views that they want to offer, and would you be content for us to proceed along those lines, Mr. Hems?
Chair, I'm happy to move that forward. I'm going to offer my apologies now and depart, because I have another meeting to attend about the severe weather, and then a call with the contractor about whether we can get any rounds out today. I'll let Matt update with me anything further on that.
That's well understood, and thank you for coming along today. And I think, as Councillor Brown made the point earlier, we certainly do appreciate the services that are being delivered in what you might call challenging conditions, and that goes across the board, really. I know that your service is one that we see perhaps in the highest profile by and large, but of course there are others out there delivering services in much the same way, and they are undoubtedly challenging for everybody. So thank you very much for that, Mr. Hems.
Can I just suggest, Chairman, if someone wanted to make a proposal to add it to the work programme, we can leave it time unspecified until Steve has been able to kind of clarify when that should best come forward.
Yeah, indeed. A proposer and seconder, please. I've got Councillor Fredericks and Councillor Brown. A show of hands, please.
I'll do a roll call on that, Chairman.
All right. You want to formalise?
Yeah. So Councillor Dixon.
4.
Councillor Withington.
4.
Councillor Blathwaite.
4.
Councillor Fredericks.
4.
Councillor Heinrich.
4.
Councillor Mancini Boyle.
4.
Councillor Spagnola.
4.
Councillor Varley.
4.
Councillor Cushing.
4.
And Councillor Brown.
4.
Okay, that's all in favour. Sorry, Chairman, you're muted.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Moving on to item 9 then, responses of the Council or the Cabinet to committee reports or recommendations. Well, we've got a number there that are shown on our papers. Matt, do you want to speak to any of those, or are they?
It was just to note, really, Chairman, that those recommendations from the car park income data report and the base budget report were all accepted by Cabinet.
Fine. Okay. Does anybody have any observations on any of those? I see no hands. Okay. Thank you. So you're happy to note those then, please. Item 10, the medium-term financial strategy for 2022 to 2025. Councillor Seaward.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, Chairman. Good morning, members. You've got this report as a separate item or came to you separately in front of you. I suppose when I'm talking about this, I almost have a sense of deja vu, because when I ever look at the Council's forward financial projections, there's always deficits. And that's no different at the moment. Indeed, the figure is roughly the same as what it was when we looked at it 12 months ago. Now, in terms of how I tend to look at these things, clearly the aim of the council's finances is that they're effectively organised to look at and meet and address the council's corporate objectives. In doing that, we have to have a balanced budget, and therefore it is important that come the end of this calendar year, that is in the position where we are. The main reason at the moment why we're showing a deficit is because officers, quite rightly, are being very prudent, and because of the uncertainties around the levels of central government support. And as you know, Chairman, at the last meeting, the committee made recommendations that we needed to continue our efforts to central government to ensure that we were more certain about what central government support would be forthcoming, and that rather than having 1 year settlements, we had them over 3 years. In saying that, as I'm sure you're aware, we're no different from plenty of other councils across the country. The second thing in looking at this is that in trying to look at our financial resources, it is always important that the council needs to ensure that we're operating as efficiently as possible, that we always look to see if savings can be made. If in fact we're using resources which are not directed at meeting our corporate objectives, then they can be redirected, they can be added to what we wish to do, or we can even, if we wanted to, not have the continual increases in council tax, but limit them. So that is what we're trying to do. Now, we would have liked, if COVID hadn't got in the way, to have started some of this exercise of zero-based budgeting in the current financial year. That's not been possible. The paper does set out, as did the paper that went to Cabinet, what we're proposing to do next year, zero-based budgeting, asking departments to look at what the implications would be of a 10% reduction in their budgets, ensuring that our fees and charges meet the costs. We're now talking about ensuring that we have a asset repair fund in the reserves, so that if our assets are in need of replacement or refurbishment, we're not having to scratch around all the time to look for the money. So there's a number of things which are already in place. Officer Lucy Hume is with us this morning. If you want more details about how we move forward and what we're proposing to do during the summer, she will be in a position to answer it, and any other technical questions in the report. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Seward. Just before we open up for questions, can I just be clear about a summary, perhaps, of what you've just said? Would it be right to summarise what you've just said by describing the situation or the approach that you are taking is one of a mix of prudence and wait and see approach? Just to add a little bit to that, I think the prudence bit, I think you've kind of explained with regard to being cautious and making sure that there are adequate resources available to meet the needs across the range of priorities. And the wait and see element of that is the situation that you've referred to many times, and I think most people understand, and that is the lack of certainty around long-term funding from government. So would it be right to characterise what you've said as the principles of prudence and wait and see approach?
Thank you, Chairman. There is an element of wait and see. On the other hand, we do have a programme starting in the summer to actually go through a zero budgeting exercise to look at the implications of savings for the reasons that I've set out, and that will take place. Now, whether as a result of that, we will need to use some of that work or not, only time will tell, but we are certainly getting on with it for the reasons I stated, because we do need to have some plans in place in case things get very difficult.
That's very helpful. Thank you. I just wanted to be kind of clear about that, because I think the issue of prudence, for example, and I think you're referring to that, making sure that you've got adequate arrangements that you can call upon in the future. So I'm just wondering what your view is with regard to the urgency of the items that are shown, particularly in Appendix E, which were many of the ideas that came forward from the finance workshop in November of last year.
Yes, I am aware of those. They are simply ideas at the moment that members have put forward. Officers, as you will be aware, also have put forward various ideas which were reflected in that November briefing. All those matters will be looked at again during the process I've outlined to you. They are not forgotten. Some of them we can certainly look at very seriously, but there's others which will not be viable. One in particular, because you can't do it because you would have to have primary legislation. So, but they will all be looked at and taken into account as we move this exercise forward. And from my point of view, I'm very comfortable about being open to this committee about the process that officers will be following, and for you to have updates as we move through the summer into the autumn.
Can I just press you a little bit on the matter of timescale and urgency, because I think most people would recognise that those ideas will take a considerable amount of time to work up into viable proposals and an implementation plan for them, and that we don't really have much time in which to do that. So the timelines, I think, are really quite crucial in forming a judgment about whether these ideas are going to be developed to be able to be available to call on to fill some of these gaps. It comes back, I suppose, to the old principle of planning for the worst and hoping for the best. So I'd like your view on the urgency of those, please.
Yes. I rather like that phrase, Chairman. I did discuss this again with the officers the other day. There's some preparatory planning that will go on following once we've got through the budget for this year. Of course, they're also having to do year-end accounts and address that at the same time. But the preparatory planning will be taking place starting around March, April time. We hope to get going in June, and by late autumn, I would hope that we're in a position which you've set out in terms of, we know what the implications are, we know what the savings are, and if we do need to press some buttons to address some of this, we're in a position to do so.
Okay, I will leave it at that. Thank you, Councillor Zeawood. I open it up for questions then. I thought I saw a hand. Yes, Councillor Withington.
We have Councillor Varley first, I'm afraid, sorry.
I thought yes, okay, Councillor Varley and then Councillor Withington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say, first of all, thank you, Officer Hume, and of course, Councillor Seward, for bringing this today. As always, Officer Hume, it's just a really easy to follow report, and it's extremely detailed. It's fantastic. These reports obviously take such a long time, and we've discussed in previous meetings that on top of all the fantastic work you do on a daily basis, you then have to take time out to write these reports, and you've written quite a few reports on today's meeting, so I thought I would just note that. And also just note that we appreciate these reports and all the hard work you do. So, Mr. Chairman, I was reading through the agenda, and obviously I got to the medium-term financial report, which is on its own a separate report. And I was just struck with a bit of confusion as to why this was a separate report, because we did touch upon this at the previous meeting, and Officer Hume and Councillor Seward explained that there would be extensive evaluating into the saving options, and we would be lobbying into government funding. And as it's just been stated today, of course, it's uncertain times, but this is an ongoing process. And I'm just confused why it was necessary to have this report today and this discussion now. I just don't understand the merit for discussing this now. This needs to come back to overview and scrutiny at a later date. So, Mr. Chairman, can I just get clarification as to why you deemed it necessary to have this as a separate report and the discussion to continue today, please? Thank you.
Yes, I'm happy to do that. On our work programme, it has always been shown as a separate piece of work. And so it's been handled on that basis. So if you look at our forward work programmes, it has always been listed as a separate piece of work. And it's no more and no less than a continuation of that approach. You will notice that the report we have before us today differs from the mentions of medium-term financial strategies that have been in the past papers. And the past paper I refer to was at our last meeting when we considered the 21-22 budget, and there was a mention in there. But we also drew a conclusion, if you remember, that that we did seek further information on the substance of the strategy, and we then asked for this paper that's before us today. So that was a committee decision, not one that that I took on my own. It was reflecting the view that had been formed earlier and in accordance with the work programme.
Right, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for clarifying that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Whittington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Eric, for that summary. Put my teeth back in. Summary of how you see it, and I wonder, following your comments as well, Chair, whether it's probably better that we use the term "now wait and see" sort of has a bit of a derogatory feeling towards it, in my view, in that it sort of implies that it's not proactive at all, whereas I think there is an element of prudence and planned consideration of our options. I mean, I've heard all the way through people talking about this will get done and when it will get done. So is it worthwhile, do you think, then, on that basis, adding this as a something that will bring in? I believe I heard Councillor Seward say that they'll be sort of putting things together and knowing where it's going in June and the end of the autumn to have a full picture. So bringing that back as an update as to where they are in June in terms of both the zero-based budgeting and the proposals in for consideration in Appendix E. And then I know there are other options that the officers are considering as well. So for those things to come back with an update as to, has that started, how's it going, with a final report in September. Does I don't know how people feel about that, whether that's can
I just add in there, Liz, the MTFS normally does come forward in September. Obviously with the impact of COVID, it was substantially later this year, but I think around that time we would be expecting to see the MTFS for next year anyway. So
yeah, but I think we're talking about these specifics as well, Matt, sort of highlighting these, that they need, you know, that that this work's been ongoing and needs to be brought back possibly.
Yeah, I think just to intervene there, I think you make a very reasonable proposal, Councillor Withington, and perhaps we just kind of park that one to one side for a moment and hear some more comments if there are any, and we'll pick that up and make a decision around that, if you're happy with that.
Fine.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Fredericks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, my thanks to the officers for putting this together, and also to Eric. I just wanted to reiterate the recommendation that I made before on this subject, that we continue to lobby central government to bring forward ideas, or actually, you know, even give us a clue even to how much they're going to give us in central government funding. I'd just like to put that again to our two MPs if possible, because it's really tricky. I'm no mathematician, believe me, but I know what my household budget is going to be for the next 6 months at least, so I can budget. It must be really, really difficult for officers to try and put a budget together, not knowing what the score is. So if we could just continue to lobby our two MPs to do that for us. Thank you.
I don't think anybody would challenge your point, Councillor Fredericks. It's just that if you look at the top of the page of the very agenda that we're on now, we have the recommendation that we made from the last meeting. So I think the point is very well made, and I don't think it will disappear off of our agenda. That doesn't take anything away from the point that you make. I'm just simply saying that I'm not sure that we can gain anything by remaking it. I think we probably have got it there as a permanent request, if you like, a permanent challenge that we would always want a greater certainty, and who would disagree with that? So I think that's a standing item more than anything else. Any other comments? Councillor Mancini-Boyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got two questions actually for Councillor Seward and Officer Hume. My first one is, I've looked through all the figures, and I've come across a phrase that I quite like, and that is the council will use the most efficient utilisation of council assets and maximising returns. My question is, after looking through all the figures, I've noticed that we're going to spend roughly 2.7 million on the Cromer Pier. What is the long-term strategy for the pier? As it seems to me, we seem to be putting money after money. Have you got any fresh ideas on this? And my second question to Councillor Hume probably is I've done a bit of research on the JVC with regard gate fees for recycling, and they're set to increase quite dramatically. At the moment, they're around about 35 to 38 pounds. It's up to around about 65, 70 pounds in 2014. Has that been factored into the budget?
Okay, thank you for those. Who wants to go first? Councillor Seward?
I'll just deal with the pier. Look, Cromer Pier is what they call the jewel in the crown in North Norfolk. Look, it takes money. Sometimes we get money from various grants outside of the council. Sometimes we have to fund it ourselves. The question you posed has been one that successive cabinets have looked at ever since I've been on the council, wondering if there's another way of looking at this. And at the moment, I'm not aware of any new thinking on this, but if this committee wants to have a look at this issue sometime and to come up and discuss it and to put forward some ideas about the long-term future of investing in the pier, which will continue to require continual investment. I'm quite happy to do that because it's an intractable problem, but it is our jewel in the crown. It's very important to our tourist economy, and in many ways it's a unique pier because it's one of the very few that's actually left in the country where you have variety shows and live entertainment in a theatre on the pier. So you've got to keep it there, but the cost of funding it, yeah, I take your point.
Okay, thank you. Officer Hume.
Morning, everybody. So on the first point around the pier and kind of utilisation of assets generally, so there's a number of things we'd look at when we look at this. So the income generation potential directly from a particular asset is one thing, but also the kind of the economic boost an asset has generally over the area. So the pier is clearly a big draw for the public from near and far. So the reason why we look to maintain that appropriately is to give that kind of wider tourism boost to the local area. So although it generates us a direct income through a management fee, the wider benefit for the area is kind of a service benefit that we also take into account. Around the gate fees, there's actually other sort of similar items. So we do detailed budget work for the year coming. Any effects of policy changes or increase in fees for years following that are not looked at till much nearer the time. So they'll be looked at in a very kind of general sense, but in the sense of the detail, we only focus on 1 year at a time, just because there can be such large fluctuations caused by those differences in the detail. So any effects that will be sort of apparent within the next financial year, so the 21-22 financial year, taken into account, but any that are following that are not fully taken into account at this stage.
Are you content with that, Councillor Mancini-Borough?
Yes, yes, that was actually my next question. Perhaps we should have a look at this pier. I'd like to go on record that I'm not actually a pier hater. I actually quite like the thing, but however, I do think a fresh set of eyes, new ideas, go out to some sort of a consultation with local entrepreneurs or international or the whole of the country to come up with some ideas, because we want to keep the thing, but we also don't want to keep losing money on, especially during these quite difficult times.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Fredericks.
Thank you. Am I right in thinking that it's a Grade 2 listed building as well? Oh, sorry, just typical. It's a Grade 2 listed building, and we have legal obligations to keep up the maintenance of it. I don't know if that's true or not.
Who would like to come forward with a response to that?
I'm not sure on this in terms of its listing, but I know that while we own it, we do have certain responsibilities around maintenance. So unless we decide to transfer ownership to someone else, we do have certain repair and maintenance obligations that we have to fulfil regardless.
Okay. Mr. Blatch, do you have anything to add on that?
No, I think what Officer Lucy Hume has just outlined is the position that I would have shared with you, in terms of we have an obligation to maintain that structure at this time. And I think Lucy identified very well for you the issues. It's not just the direct costs and income that we receive in terms of the commercial aspects, but the immeasurable value that structure provides to North Norfolk in as an iconic structure. We do have large numbers of television companies want to come and film from the pier in terms of weather conditions and that sort of thing, which obviously brings untold value in terms of marketing for tourism in the district. And it's not just Cromer that benefits from that, it is our coastal offer particularly. So yeah, it is a costly structure. I'm very comfortable with you wanting to explore alternative delivery methods to make sure that we obtain value for money, but I don't think there'll be a queue of people that are wanting to relieve us of our obligations to maintain that asset. It is a costly asset, and it is obviously in a very vulnerable environment. And I think the council does very well in terms of its maintenance of that asset.
Okay, thank you for that. I think there was a mention on the chat that indeed it is a listed grade 2. Does that answer your question, Councillor Fredericks?
It does, thank you. And I think it's such a fantastic draw to the coast. Obviously, being a coastal member myself, I think it's an amazing asset that we have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I see 2 hands raised, Councillor Blathwaite and Councillor Heinrich. I'm not quite sure which one was first.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, you hadn't answered my second question about the gate fees for recycling.
Oh, I beg your pardon. Well, before we do that, yes, would that be, who would like to proffer an answer on that?
I'm happy to comment, Chair. Obviously, Lucy Hume did respond to that question in her response to Councillor Mancini-Boyle in terms of the approach the council takes and looking at these costs that do change over time in terms of contractual obligations. The issue around how the recycling market has changed over time is something that is discussed at the Norfolk Waste Partnership across authorities, collection and waste disposal authorities as a whole. It is something that your officers, Steve Hems and Scott Martin, are representing the authority in, and the portfolio holder, Councillor Nigel Lloyd, is appraised of those issues. And as Lucy says, provision will be made as more information comes forward in future years. But we do have a contract at the present time for the handling and reprocessing of our recyclate.
Okay, thank you for that. Does that answer your question more fully, Councillor Mancini-Boyle?
Yes, it does. I just wanted to make sure it was included in the budget because it's going to be quite a severe increase. That was my original question.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Blathwaite.
Just to say, I am experienced at running piers. The more commercial you make a pier, the less attractive it is as a structure. So I think there has to be a balance made there. But if anybody wants to ask me about running piers, I'm more than happy to give my views.
Okay, thank you for that. Perhaps another day. You might be inundated with requests on that one. Right, Councillor Heinrich and then Councillor Brown.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. Again, with regard to the pier, I just wonder whether any consideration's been given to setting up a charitable trust to take it over that should give access to lottery funding, which might be of some use. Just an idea to throw out.
Perhaps that is a good idea to throw out, and I'm not sure that we're that well placed to give you an answer, but perhaps if an officer has a brief answer to that. Do we have any offers on that? I think probably...
Well, I would suggest, Chair, that that's something that if a working party or task and finish group is set up to look at that issue, that could be established at that time. But the authority hasn't been unsuccessful in lottery funding in the past. We would need to look at the benefits of that in terms of taxation, VAT, all of those issues into the future.
Okay, thank you. Well, if you're content, Councillor Heinrich, we'll hold on to that idea and perhaps pursue it another day, but not today.
That's fine, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Brown?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I just want to take us back to the financial outlook and the medium-term financial strategy. I understand that the government announced a 4.5% increase in core funding for local authorities, but when you dig down into this, it would seem that the majority of that is likely to come from council tax increases, which of course we're not very willing to implement, but the government has done the best it can do to encourage local authorities to increase their council taxes, given that if we use the settlement funding assessment as a proxy for the baseline calculation, I note that over the last 5 years, core financial support from the government has been reduced by 30.4%. And I just wondered if I could ask Officer Lucy Hume if that is sustainable for this council in the immediate future moving forward, please.
Okay, thank you. Officer Hume?
Yeah, really happy to answer that one. So should those cuts to that settlement funding assessment continue, then no, that's not sustainable. It's not sustainable for any council. I think, you know, the increases in core spending power that were billed, so they were about 4.5%. It varies for each council, but approximately 4% of that was the council tax increase. The rest of it was a kind of inflationary increase on those other funding streams. So we did make representations around that following the provisional settlement, and sort of said we were getting some kind of mixed messages. So clearly the government were quite pleased with the settlement they'd given us, and that it had a real terms increase of funding. But also on the other hand, sort of said you need to be mindful about your council tax increases. So you can't really you can't follow the letter of both of those things. You can't enjoy the increase in your core spending power without increasing the council tax. So there is a balancing act to be had there. I mean, I don't think there's going to be many councils across the country that won't be increasing their council tax and taking advantage of that increase in the core spending power. But no, the short answer to your question is no, that the cuts to the SFA is not sustainable. And should we see another 5 or 10% drop, then we will be in some considerable difficulty over a 2 to 3 year period. And I think a lot of other councils would get there a lot more quickly than that. So given the representations we have made to government, I hope that they have taken that message on board. I think they have. You know, we wait to see the outcomes of the fair funding review and the review of the business rates retention scheme, which I hope will look to address some of those historical cuts. I would be very surprised if we see a reversal of those cuts to SFA, especially given the financial pressure the government is now under after the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. But I would hope that we don't see any further cuts, because that will put us in a dangerous position very quickly.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Brown?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for that answer. And may I also join my colleague, Councillor Varley, in thanking Officer Lucy Hume for the reports prepared and for all the diligent work that she has undertaken in that regard. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, okay, thank you very much. I think that's the point that we would share across the committee. Any other hands that anybody wishes to comment?
I see no further hands raised, Chairman.
No, okay. In that case, if we've got nothing further to say on this matter, I just revert back to, I think, what I interpreted as a proposal from Councillor Withington, that we return back to this matter in perhaps June, reschedule consideration of this matter back in June. And if I got it right, Councillor Withington, not trying to put words in your mouth, so to speak, and that would be in order to particularly consider the progress made in respect to Appendix E, those particular proposals, ideas. Is that correct?
Yes, it was those, but also the zero-based budgeting as well. But it's an update at that stage with a formal report in September, I was proposing.
Could I just clarify with Officer Hume, Chairman? I believe we'd have the outturn report come forward in June that would potentially cover those progress on those items. Could I just check with Lucy if that is the case?
Yeah, I'm not sure at that stage when the outturn report comes forward whether we'd be sufficiently far along the line to provide much more of an update than we already have, given the work that will be done by the team in closing the accounts. I think if we could, particularly with the paper deadline, I think if we could postpone that to later on this in the summer, I would be able to provide a much fuller update for the committee, and would be more than happy for that to cover an update on those savings proposals, but also the zero-based budgeting process as well.
So are you talking about September there then, in effect, Lucy?
September is a date I could work towards, certainly.
Okay, thank you for that. So can I just clarify then, Councillor Withington, you are no longer looking at the June timescale, but September. Is that right?
That's fine. That's fine with me. Working with the officers is essential.
Anybody else got any thoughts on that proposal? Councillor Varley, is that a hand raised?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just saying I'm happy to second that proposal. That was basically the substance of what I was saying earlier. I fully agree with Councillor Withington on this.
Okay. Any other contributions around that proposal?
Can I just clarify, Chairman, rather than asking for an additional report here, we are essentially, you are proposing that progress update on those savings proposals be included in the outturn report that would come in mid to late summer. Is that correct?
I think that's basically what we've worked our way around to through a little process of clarifications on that. Yes, that would seem to be what it amounts to.
Okay, there looks to be no more questions. If we have a proposer and a seconder, if you'd like to move to the vote, I can do a roll call.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Withington, are you the proposer?
Yes.
And Councillor Varley, can I interpret your as a seconder?
Yes, that's correct, Chairman.
Thank you. Can we move to the vote then, please?
Yep, just another clarification, Chairman. I assume in moving to the vote, you're also content that the committee is making the standing officer's recommendation to recommend the MTFS is approved by full council. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. Yes, we will pick up that recommendation as part of that.
Okay, so Councillor Dixon?
For?
Councillor Withington?
For?
Councillor Blathwaite?
For?
Councillor Fredericks?
For?
Councillor Heinrich?
For?
Councillor Mancini Boyle?
For?
Councillor Spagnola?
For?
Councillor Varley?
For?
Councillor Cushing?
For?
And Councillor Brown?
For?
Okay, that's unanimous.
Okay, thank you for that. Moving on then to item 12, which is I beg your pardon, item 11, the capital strategy for 21-22. Councillor Seward?
This is a standard sort of process technical report. If Officer Hume has anything further to add, I pass over to her, Chairman.
Thank you for that. Officer Hume.
Yeah, just to say, this report comes through annually. It must be approved before the start of the financial year to which it relates, which is why it usually comes through in February. It's very much a continuation of our previous year's strategy. There haven't been any major revisions at all, but I'm happy to take any questions that the committee might have.
Okay, thank you for that. Any questions? I see no hands. Okay, if there are no hands to speak, could I have a proposer to accept the recommendation to recommend to full council? Councillor Heinrich and
see Councillor Fredericks has a
Councillor Fredericks, seconder. Do you want to proceed to a formal vote?
Yeah, I will do.
Yep.
Okay, Councillor Dixon.
For.
Councillor Withington.
For.
Councillor Blathwaite.
For.
Councillor Fredericks.
For.
Councillor Heinrich.
For.
Councillor Housden. Oh, sorry, he's not here. Councillor Mancini Boyle.
For.
Councillor Spagnola.
For.
Councillor Varley.
For.
Councillor Cushing.
For.
And Councillor Brown.
For.
Okay, that's unanimous.
Okay, thank you for that. Moving on then to item 12, the investment strategy for 21-22. Councillor Seawood.
Well, really, I'll just let Officer Hume just introduce this. Again, it's very much an annual process report, Chairman.
Thank you. Officer Hume.
Yeah, so it's the same again. Another annual report that has to be approved before the financial year to which it relates. So this one is in response to some guidance from MHCLG around councils and their investment. Again, it's a continuation of a previous year's strategy. But if anyone has any specific questions, then I'm happy to take them.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? I see no hands. Okay, could I have a proposer then to recommend to council that the investment strategy is approved? Councillor Heinrich and Councillor Blathwaite.
Okay, I'll move to the roll call. Councillor Dixon.
For.
Councillor Withington.
For.
Councillor Blathwaite.
For.
Councillor Fredericks.
For.
Councillor Heinrich.
For.
Councillor Mancini Boyle.
For.
Councillor Spagnola.
For.
Councillor Varley.
For.
Councillor Cushing.
For.
And Councillor Brown.
For.
Okay, that's unanimous again.
Okay, thank you for that. Moving on then to item 13, the Treasury Management Strategy for 21-22. Councillor Seawood.
Again, this is an annual report, Chairman. So I'll just pass it over to Officer Hume if there's anything further she wishes to add.
Okay, thank you. We're treading a well-trodden path, Councillor Hume. Sorry, Officer Hume.
Yes, quite. So for the third time, this strategy has to be approved the year before it relates to, and again, it is a continuation of the current strategy. It's got a lot of economic context around sort of COVID and the current low interest rates for your information. I'm more than happy to take any questions on this report too.
Okay, thank you for that. Any questions? Councillor Heinrich.
Just briefly, Chairman, just wonder whether we've done any modelling on the likely impact of negative interest rates should they come about. Thank you.
Councillor, sorry, yes, thank you for that. Officer Hume.
Yeah, so our Treasury advisors are keeping a kind of a watching brief on this negative interest rate scenario. I think luckily, I think we still feel that it's quite unlikely to actually occur. For reasons that I've explained to the committee before. I noticed the Monetary Policy Committee had a meeting, I think last week, and they unanimously voted to maintain the bank rate. Usually before the rate changes, you get a bit of a wobble, and that kind of unanimity kind of wobbles a little bit, and you get a few people voting the other way. So I think at the moment we're not in the territory of negative interest rates. There's a number of ways that it would affect us. We haven't done any significant modelling on the effects at the current time because we don't think it's likely to occur. But we will be working with our Treasury advisors to do that. And as I said, they keep a watching brief. So if they consider that move to negative interest rates is more likely, then we will do a more detailed analysis as to the financial impact of that.
Okay, thank you for that. Are you content with that, Councillor Heinrich?
I am, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? No. Okay. Could I have a proposer then that we recommend to Council the Treasury Management Strategy Statement is approved? Councillor Varley, is that a proposer? And Councillor Spagnola as a seconder. Can we move to the vote, please?
Okay, Councillor Dixon.
For.
Councillor Withington.
For.
Councillor Blathwaite.
For.
Councillor Fredericks.
For.
Councillor Heinrich.
For.
Councillor Mancini Boyle.
For.
Councillor Spagnola.
For.
Councillor Varley.
For.
Councillor Cushing.
For.
And Councillor Brown.
For.
Okay, that's unanimous again.
Okay, thank you for that. Moving on then to item 14, which is delegated decisions, January to February 21. Councillor Seward, do you want to speak to that in the absence, or Mr. Blatch? Do you want to lead on that?
I think Steve Blatch is better, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Blatch?
Chair, I'll just find the paper. I don't think there are any. Sorry, I've prepared for the next item on performance management. Just bear with me.
Officer Emma Denny put the report together. If she wants to add anything, might be helpful.
Okay, Officer Denny.
I'm happy to, Chairman. Yes, I did notice actually that the table outlining the decisions wasn't included in the scrutiny agenda, but it was in the cabinet agenda. So I've just called up the cabinet agenda so I can just get those up for you. There were just 3 decisions that were reported to cabinet on the 1st of February. One relating to the discretionary grant scheme for the impact of COVID-19, so additional money to support businesses. Then going out to consultation for the council tax support scheme. That will be coming through to full council, so you'll see the outcome of that for February. And then again, a payment for supporting the test and trace payment scheme. So they're all sort of items that needed to be dealt with before the cabinet meeting took place in February, and they're just reported to you for information. If you have any questions, if I can't answer them, I will provide an answer from the officers who prepared those reports. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Mr. Blatch, did you want to add anything to what's been said?
No, I'm grateful for Emma's assistance. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Any questions then on the delegated decisions? I see no hands. Could I have a proposer then, please, and a seconder? Councillor Brown and Councillor Mancini-Boyle. So that is to just remind myself what that recommendation is: to receive and note the report and the register of officer decisions taken under delegated powers. So that's to receive and note. Okay. Do we need a formal vote on this, Matt?
No need for that. Yeah, just a show of hands is fine tonight.
Thank you. We have a proposer and seconder and a show of hands, please. Thank you. Right. Thank you very much. Moving on then to item 15, which is the Sheringham Leisure Centre project update for February. Councillor Gay, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, you have here before you your normal portrait of the construction project that's been going on, and you will see that there's been no change in the budget, but you will see in this first column for current position, in accordance with previous decisions, that part of the programme remains under review, and you will know by now that the third consideration of this question has concluded that Splash should not reopen after we went into tier 4 and the tier 3 lockdown. The position shifted again, and you will all be aware of that by now. The change that this means is that we should be able to complete phase 1 and phase 2 of the project both by August the 12th, and that is what is being aimed for now. And as I remember, the last time we spoke, there was consideration and just quite a lot of discussion about the communications around this project. So I just wanted to add to that now and say that as we suspected in the last discussion, I think problems have come with the search terms. If you look under Sheringham Leisure Facility and not under Splash, you find information grouped together on the council website. Certainly, I usually check out the time-lapse photo link, and it was working this morning. So if because I know Councillor Housden has been concerned about this. If you simply search under Sharing Leisure Centre, you will find the news releases, time-lapse photos, plans, everything that people would want, I think, drawn together. That's it for the moment, Chairman.
Okay, thank you for that. Mr. Young, did you wish to add anything to what's been said in relation to this report?
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members. Nothing to add. I think the detailed matters which the committee was seeking have been dealt with by correspondence between Councillor Housden and myself. There was a request, which I think was minuted, for the costs of demolition within the contract, which I'm prepared to provide. Now, those are within the contract approximately £161,000. And that's to be undertaken by Metnor, who are contractors for the whole scheme. So they'll be subcontracting that element of the works. And we will be intending to progress the demolition as soon as we practically can. But I've got nothing further to add to what Councillor Gay has said.
Okay, thank you for that. Any questions then in relation to this report? Councillor Withington?
It's not a question really, it's more of a comment. I think I'd just like to state that the general feeling in Sheringham is that they understand the changing in the circumstances. It's very much appreciated that Splash was kept open for as long as possible for the well-being of the community, and I know there's been positive comments on that, but equally now with the changing circumstances, you know, it was clear that it was financially beneficial, and in terms of getting the site ready for the August the 12th, given that it would possibly only open for a matter of weeks, I think it's you know, it's a very proactive and sensible decision to have made. So I think I haven't seen on the whole any negative remarks in regard to that. So I'd also like to thank officers and Councillor Gay for keeping local members informed and enabling us to give the relevant information where appropriate to local councillors as well. So that's made a huge difference in managing the situation. So thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Withington. It's good to have some feedback on local response, and I can well understand that why you might get some mixed feeling. But I think if we just go back in time to last year when this committee first asked for a report along the lines of what would be the case for an earlier demolition, was that justified, and to that we accepted that and kept it under review. It has clearly been reviewed, and to the present time seems to have been the time to implement that decision. So to that extent, the work that was done last year in preparation for such an option to be implemented was not nugatory work, but very positive work that enabled that decision, no doubt, to be made in a quick order of time. And it's good to see that that decision has been made. If that's the appropriate decision, then obviously something like that needs to be made in fairly quick order of time. So that's, I think, helpful, and is a demonstration of the positive attitude of this committee towards those kind of options, and working together as we can as one team, so to speak. Councillor Gay, I see you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yes, it only remains for me to thank the committee also for the attention they've given to this matter. And of course, Mr. Young and Kate Rawlings and the communications team who put together such a very useful and excellent release for us. So I'd like to thank all of those people, and just to stress what Mr. Young has said, the demolition costs, the 161,500 that's been revealed to you, that's in the budget. That's within the figures that you've been looking at all along. It's not an additional cost. I'd like to stress that. Thank you all very much.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Gay, for that clarification. And I think it's helpful to know something more about why the communications link wasn't quite as clear as it might have been. And I think we understand that now. It was certainly very helpful to have the presentation that we did last time around. And I would hope that we could have something similar in the months to come to keep us in touch with and connect with the progress that's going on the site. And it's good that we will see the project finished earlier, and potentially there may well be some net savings to be made from this decision as well. But I understand that there's further work to be done in regard to that, but at least we're on the case. And that's good to know. Thank you. So, okay, I think we are asked to note this report. Is that correct, Matt?
Yes, that is indeed. Perhaps I would just ask members if you are content to maintain this as a monthly update, or whether you'd like to reconsider that position. It's entirely up to you. I'll leave that for you to discuss.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I think the view certainly that I would take is that it's worth at least hearing an update on a monthly basis, but not necessarily a written report. That report can either be given by the portfolio holder or indeed an officer, if that's, but not to make heavy weather of it. We would want, I think, to know, I think from what we said last time around, that we would like at least to keep our finger on the pulse here, but we don't need to, you know, the patient is not in intensive care. It's a question of just simply monitoring. So on that basis, I put it to you that perhaps we ought to continue with the monthly monitoring on a basis of oral updates with any material that might be relevant of a written nature. And perhaps we should schedule a presentation in at an appropriate time just to keep us visually up to date with the site. Any views on that? I'm getting several nods of heads and thumbs up. That's helpful. Thank you very much indeed. So if we can just, do you wish for a proposer and seconder to note it, this, Matt?
I think you're essentially carrying on with our current arrangements in that case, so you just need to note the report.
Okay, thank you. Just show of hands to note the report, please.
Yes, that's duly noted.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Moving on then to the item that Mr. Blatch has been holding himself in preparation for, the performance report, quarter 3, 2020 and 21. Mr. Blatch.
Thank you, Chairman. The report is before you. It details the Council's corporate performance over the period October 2020 through to December 2020. During the early part of that period, COVID case numbers were very low in the district, and the Council had returned to a more business as usual format of service provision. But obviously with rising rates nationally in October, there was the second national lockdown in November, and then rapidly rising rates in December, which did unfortunately impact on North Norfolk as well. So that's the context of the report, but I believe that good progress has been made across a range of measures as detailed in the report and supporting papers. Progress has been made on a significant number of the Cabinet or administration's corporate priorities around climate change, temporary accommodation, and as you've just received, a report on the progress of the Sheringham Leisure Centre development. Obviously towards the latter part of the period, the Council's focus did have to move once again to the payment of grants, and that's for businesses. That significantly impacted on the capacity of the economic growth team, particularly to take forward their other work programme. But I'm happy to take any questions that members might have. We've attempted to bring this report to you early, in that it hasn't gone to Cabinet first. It has been brought to your committee first, given the request that information was presented in a more timely manner.
Okay, thank you very much.
Take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blatch, for that. Any questions then for Mr. Blatch on the performance management report? Councillor Cushing, followed by Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a fairly specific one, actually, on 4.6.1 about the installation of electric vehicle charging points. I note in there that engineers visited Fakenham at the end of January to assess the position there. Just wonder if you have an update and when we might likely to see those installed.
Mr. Blatch.
I'm not able to answer that question now. I'm happy to give a written answer to members. I was aware that the works had. I was aware that the officers have met UK Power Networks out on site, but I don't know the detail of that action.
Okay, thank you, Mr.
Nigel
Blatch.
Lloyd has his hand raised. He might be able.
Yes, Councillor Lloyd, you've probably made an appearance at an appropriate time.
Oh, I've been watching from afar, Chair. With interest, I should say. I think Councillor Shires also has a hand up. So, but the last update I had was last week. Wells, Sheringham, Cromer, Holt are online. Fakenham was just about to be hooked up. It may well be already, but I haven't had an update this week. It may well have been affected by weather. I'm not sure whether Councillor Shires can update better than I. So I'll hand over to her if that's okay with you, Chair.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Lloyd. Councillor Shires.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members. I was about to give the same update as Councillor Lloyd has given. I can get the written answer to where we are with Fakenham. Obviously, the North Walsham site hit a bump with the supermarket not wishing to be very supportive in what we were trying to do in terms of getting the power to where we wanted to. So we are looking for an alternative site for North Walsham, and I'll come back to members with when and where we'll know more about that.
Okay, thank you. So, Councillor Cushing, are you content with that?
Yeah, I'd be appreciated if I could be updated. Indeed, I'm sure the other Fakenham members would appreciate the update when it is put live, please.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just perhaps a point to correct. I'm just looking at page 64 of the report in the agenda. And section 1.4.2, investment in temporary accommodation. I think it reads, we must acquire properties by 31st of March 2020. And I suspect that should read 2021 to make
That
sense.
is correct, that's correct, Councillor Brown, yes.
Yeah, but that's not the main point I wanted to make. Moving above to section 1.1.1 concerning the housing delivery targets, I would just like to put on record my thanks as the chair of the working party to the policy management team for meeting their targets over the last 3 years, which, as you will see from the report, avoids any penalties being imposed by central government to increase our housing delivery target. And I may, at risk of being accused of going on ad nauseam about the housing delivery test and the formula for calculating housing numbers, I am pleased that the policy planning team have decided to press ahead with the local plan using the established methodology rather than interrupting their performance and their work with the proposal in the white paper, which the government has mercifully now taken a U-turn on, and that the majority of development moving forward to meet the house building test or numbers that the government want to see delivered annually will now be concentrated in urban areas, in particular in 20 of our cities, and on brownfield sites. So I'd just like to place on record my thanks to officers in the planning policy team for their dedicated work. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Brown. Any other questions in relation to this report? Councillor Mancini-Boyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is actually, instead of my normal doom and gloom, it's actually quite a good question. I would like to thank the new Environment Officer, Ali Samatsi, with the support of Officer Young, in the work that they're doing with the Carbon Reduction Action Plan. I think that's a fantastic strategy, and I think they should be congratulated for it.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Withington.
Thank you, Chair. Mine that relates actually to what Councillor Mancini-Boyle just said. I found it really interesting that actually having this enables us to pull things together that are going on in different strands, and it's particularly relevant to the climate action emergency that we're dealing with. So on page 66, you can see, as Councillor Mancini-Boyle has said, how much progress is being made with the environmental charter and the new environmental officers. But actually, when you start reading it, there's other things going on across the board. So looking at the progress that's made with tree planting and our housing stock audit and all those kind of things, they're all linked to that. And I just wonder, because it's something that's so important to people in this area, whether there's any way we can pull those strands together and actually see all those things together, because you've got to sort of be looking through everything. Perhaps the progress that's been made in those areas isn't as obvious, because when you look at them all together, it's actually quite a significant amount of work that's being done. And it would be good for, not only the members, but also the public to be able to see that that work's actually taking place. So I don't know, we had a really good in-phase training session with Councillor Thomas, despite difficulties getting in and etc. But I think I do wonder whether it's something that we could look at and pulling that particular area together a little bit more as a positive.
Okay, thank you for that observation. I don't know whether Officer Thomas or Officer Blatch wants to respond on that possibility.
Could I, sorry, Steve, I'll just quickly cut in that I have been in touch with the new kind of environmental policy team, and we are looking to bring the environmental charter in a draft form to scrutiny in the coming months. I'll pass over to either Steve or Helen now, but I think they would potentially like to, or perhaps would be happy to provide a wider briefing on what they've been doing, perhaps.
Great,
well, thanks, Matt. Thanks, Matt. I think obviously this in-phase report, is performance management report using the new in-phase tool, is intended to provide that information in a single place in the way that Councillor Withington describes. If we wish to go further, particularly around the environmental objectives, and it wants it wider than electric vehicle charging points or our carbon reduction or our tree planting programme, we can obviously look at that through the environmental charter that Matt has just outlined, or another means of communication, which the comms team can advise us on in terms of approach. But this report is being refined. Helen's given a lot of attention and worked with officers across the council to strengthen the comments, improve the comments, and bring them together in this single performance management report. And I do think it's a positive direction of travel to increase understanding and accountability for delivery.
Okay, thank you. Officer Thomas, do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, there's one thing to add. The performance portal that I did demonstrate a few weeks ago is now connected to our website, and the public can see the whole of the progress up to date, including the information you're seeing today on the whole of the delivery plan and our key performance measures. So that is accessible, and all of the climate, coast and environment actions are together on one page, so people can see an overview of how that plan is going.
Okay, that's helpful. That must take us some way towards what you're looking for, Councillor Willington. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? I've only got one, which I think is in the same vein as that raised earlier. On page 67, in relation to performance measure 5.1.3, I think that budget setting should be 22-23, not 21-22.
I think you're correct, Chair. We'll make that change.
Thank you. I don't think there was any other observations that I had. Any other further thoughts? No, I see no hands raised. Okay. Recommendation is that the committee resolves to note this report and endorse the actions taken by the corporate leadership team detailed in Appendix A, managing performance, and makes any recommendations to Cabinet it thinks necessary. Well, we, unless I've missed them, don't think we have any recommendations. So are you happy to note the report as we have discussed? Could I have a show of hands on that, please?
Okay, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. That's unanimous, is it?
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, moving then to item 17, the Cabinet Work Programme, Matt.
Yep, just bear with me, just scrolling to that now. In terms of the Cabinet Work Programme, I think you'll see really that we've come to a point now where we're taking quite a few items as pre-scrutiny, moving over more to that model. So we're perhaps slightly ahead of the Cabinet Work Programme in that we've seen items already that are on their March meeting. You will see there, and I'll mention it as part of the scrutiny work programme as well. The equality and diversity policy is on there for approval in April. There is a process ongoing with that. We have a draft that we're just making some amendments to, and we're hoping to see that on the scrutiny work programme for pre-scrutiny prior to approval at Cabinet at the next meeting in March. I think really that's everything I have to say about the Cabinet Work Programme.
Okay, thank you. Any questions then on the Cabinet Work Programme? No, I see no hands. Do you want to just carry on with the next item, Matt, the scrutiny?
Yep, of course. So the main thing to note really is that we are expecting the crime and disorder briefing next month with the Police and Crime Commissioner. And we have already suggested that we want the focus to be on tackling domestic abuse during the pandemic and any kind of other policing issues related to that. I expect there might be some questions on kind of general policing of the breaching of COVID-19 lockdown legislation. I would suggest if anyone has any kind of written questions they want to submit to the Police and Crime Commissioner in advance, if you could kind of have a think and get those to me as soon as possible. The more time he has them, the better response you might get, really. In addition to that, I did say that we can also hopefully expect the equality and diversity policy at that meeting. And I mentioned just briefly in that performance report that there is also kind of background discussions going on about the environmental charter, or a draft charter, coming for a pre-scrutiny session. I'm not 100% sure when that will be yet. I expect it might be at the April meeting. So just to kind of outline the possibility of that coming forward. But yeah, happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Withington.
Okay. It's a question for Matt, if you don't mind, Chair. I'm assuming that from what you just said, that we're aiming to get towards a situation where the majority of things, it obviously won't always be possible, will come to pre-scrutiny before they go to Cabinet. Is that correct?
Where possible, I think it allows the committee to be a bit more productive rather than looking at things that have already been approved, essentially, yeah.
Yeah.
It's not always the case, but we'll try where we can.
No. And I just wanted to say that was really good to hear you say that, because I think it's about this emphasis on scrutiny being for improvement, and rather than knocking things back or etc. I think it's really important that we do have that approach. I think that's probably my background of school improvement, coming in and dotting T's and crossing I's and trying to get things done before they go in any further. So, but I think that's a really important role that we have, and I'm really glad to see that, Matt. So thank you for stating that.
No worries. Okay, I think we have to thank the officers that are involved in that, because it takes a lot of work to get those reports forward in time to do that. Certainly, I know that was the case with the performance report this time. So yeah, thank you to Helen and Steve for pushing that forward.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I think that's consistent with the protocol that we've developed in the last year or so with regard to working with the Cabinet and working with Cabinet members in a slightly revised way from the past. And I think there's already been said what the challenge that there is in this is in seeing the papers at an earlier stage does perhaps create some difficulty in terms of timelines and the degree of development which some of the papers might not have in coming to us at an earlier point. So long as we recognise that, then I think that we can manage those expectations in a reasonable manner. Any other questions, points, observations? No. Okay, thank you. So in relation to both those reports, that's the Cabinet Work Programme and the Scrutiny Committee Work Programme, are you content to note those? And if so, a show of hands, please.
Okay, yep, noted.
Okay, thank you. So I think that then takes us to item 19. There are no other matters remaining on our agenda to exclude the budget, exclude the public and the press. And my iPad is just about to run out of power. So it's probably very timely that we close the meeting. So thank you very much indeed, everybody, for your input today and for the papers that we have considered. And so thank you very much indeed. And everybody stay safe in the rather challenging weather and COVID conditions that we have. So thank you very much indeed, and goodbye.